All right, we're going to do the heart and some of the circulation in the heart. All right, what is it? This consists of the heart and the blood and the blood vessels. All right, we got two main circuits of the heart. We have a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. Pulmonary circuit carries blood to the lungs and then back to the heart, and the systemic circuit carries blood from the heart to the body and then back to the heart. All right, so again, two major circuits, pulmonary and systemic. There they are. You see how it comes in, goes to the lungs, back to the heart. Leaves the heart, goes back to the body, comes back to the heart. Leaves the heart, goes to the lungs, and there's your two. So there's a two-pump system on on a mammalian heart. Here's major branches of it. You start with the blue ones here, the superior and the inferior vena cava. They come into the heart, goes through the heart. It'll leave the pulmonary artery, pulmonary trunk right here, and it'll branch to the right lung and left lung. I had them backwards, left lung and right lung. Then it'll come back to the heart in the pulmonary veins. Comes in, circulates through the heart, and then will leave through the aorta and go to the various parts of the body and come back through the vena cava. We'll hit this again, don't worry. This is a posterior view of it. You see the arteries coming back from the pulmonary arteries. There's the pulmonary veins here, the pulmonary arteries here. There's your inferior vena cava, superior, the aorta. All right. So the pericardium, this is a double-walled sac that houses the heart. An easy way to think of it is if you were to take a plastic bag and shove your fist into it, not through the side. I wish I had one here. I don't have one. You would have a bag around it, and then if you had a balloon, that would be a better way. Push a balloon in, and it ends up with two lines, two coverings. So the sac that is around the outside is what we call the parietal. So the pericardium, the parietal sac of it. And if it's touching the heart or the organ, the heart in this case, but the organ, then it's called the visceral. So we have a pericardium and an epicardium. The space between these two is called the pericardial cavity, and there is a fluid in there. So that way, if they happen to touch, it's for lubrication purposes, so they can rub by each other without causing any friction. Because friction would cause pain. And that's what they're talking about right here. See, the pericardial fluid. There's a lubricant in there. It allows it to beat with little friction. Because if it beats too much, or if there is friction, then it causes pain. Just to let you know that. So those are the areas. All of the pericardium. You have the pericardial sac, the epicardium, the pericardial cavity, and then the pericardial fluid. Now, going back to that epicardium, this is the one that lines the surface of the heart. So now we're talking about the heart itself. The myocardium is a lining on the inside of the heart. Endocardium is lining the inside of the heart, and the myocardium is the muscle of the heart itself. So if we look right down here, we're going to be in this region. Epicardium is the membrane that lines the heart. There's a similar membrane just like it on the inside, and that was going to be the endocardium that goes all over the inside of the heart. And then the muscle, the meat of the heart, is called the myocardium. You should familiarize yourselves with the major blood vessels. Again, the superior and inferior vena cava, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary arteries going to the heart, the aorta, the pulmonary veins coming back to the heart. You need to familiarize yourself with the valves of the heart. So they're in the chambers. So the first chamber, the receiving chamber, is the atrium. So the blood comes into the atrium here. Then it will pass through the tricuspid valve, going to the right ventricle, goes through the pulmonary valve, going to the lungs, comes back on the pulmonary veins, comes into the left atrium, excuse me, here, passes through the bicuspid, or also known as the mitral valve, goes into the left ventricle, excuse me, and will pass back out through the pulmonary valve, which you can't see because it's hidden behind the pulmonary trunk, and that will pass up through the aorta, and then it goes to the rest of the body. And there's a descending aorta right here because it loops up over the back and comes down behind it. And then it'll end up coming back through the vena cavis. So familiarize with those parts. These items, these strings right here, these are called the chordae tendineae. They do not open the heart. A lot of people misinterpret it. They don't pull down on those valves to open it up. What they do is, as the ventricles squeeze, they put a lot of pressure on, and the chordae tendineae keep the valves from opening up that way. So that they'll go up to a certain spot and stop so that the blood can't go back up. And if they weren't doing their job, they'd open up where blood could pass through it. So that's what they're for. There is a skeleton of the heart. It's not made of bone, obviously. It's that collagen again. Some elastic fibers in there. This gives it support, lets the myocytes, the muscle cells, form around on it. It is elastic in nature, and we think this does help with the blood expanding and filling the chambers, filling up with blood. A big thing here is that it does form kind of an insulation on the heart. So whenever there's electrical impulses going to the heart, it helps control the impulses going to the heart to make those muscles contract. Remember, there are 4 chambers, right and left atria. These are thin-walled, and again, these are receiving chambers. All right, blood's returning to the heart in these. They are thin-walled, so there's not a lot of muscle in them. That's going to be important when we talk about contractions, because they don't have a lot of muscles, so there's not a lot of electrical conductivity going on in them. The right and left ventricles are much thicker because they're the ones that are squeezing and pushing the blood to go elsewhere. I'm going to back up a little bit. Notice that the left ventricle is much thicker, the wall is, than the right ventricle. Why? Because we can back up quite a little bit here. The right ventricle is only going to the lungs. The left ventricle here goes throughout the entire body, so it's got to pump it a lot further, so it's going to be thicker. Now, arteries carry blood away, so it's leaving the heart. All right, and then veins return blood to the heart. Usually we show them, let's go to the next picture. We show veins as being, not always being, usually the veins are blue because there's less oxygen in them. But if you notice that the pulmonary artery is blue, because there's not a lot of oxygen in it. It's got to go to the lungs to get the oxygen. Now, so this is the pulmonary artery is the only artery that has deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary veins, which are bringing the blood back to the heart, these are the only veins that have oxygenated blood, because they're coming from the lungs back to the heart, and now they can send the oxygen everywhere else through the aorta, and then it'll branch off wherever it needs to go, depending on where it's going from there. Now the valves, right? Little flaps, they're called cusps or leaflets. The atrioventricular valves are the ones between the atria and the ventricles, so they're regulating the blood flow between them. On the left side is the bicuspid, or the mitral one, and the right side is the tricuspid. Now the valves for the blood leaving the heart, these are called semilunar valves, and we have 2 of these. We have the pulmonary one that's that leads to the pulmonary trunk, which goes to the lungs, and we have the aortic one, which leads to the aorta, which is going to the rest of the body. So be familiar with the name and location of these. Now, if you look at them, this has been sliced off the top. You can see the right atria over here. You see the 3 valves on it. That's why it's called the tricuspid. And on the left side, you have bicuspid. It's only got 2 Here's your aortic valve and the pulmonary valves, because as the heart squeezes those, we want those to open up and let the blood flow out. These two, we do not want them to open when the ventricles squeeze, but we want the aortic and pulmonary to open up in that case. So yeah, very familiar with the circulation. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. I doubt it. Move that over some. I don't want to. All right. Again, blood comes back through the inferior and superior vena cava. Okay. Fills into the right atrium. Will pass through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then as that squeezes, it'll pass through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary trunk and pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries goes carrying the blood away. Goes to the lungs, picks up its oxygen now. Now it's coming back through the pulmonary veins. It will go to the left atrium. From there, it passes through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. Then as that contracts, it squeezes and goes through the aortic valve and into the aorta and goes to the rest of the body where the oxygen is distributed, picks up the carbon dioxide and comes back to the heart. And that is our circuit. It's a dual circuit because you got to go to the lungs and then to the body. Now, as blood leaves, right here, just kind of right through this area. As blood leaves, let me see if I can draw a little bit on here. As blood leaves and goes out the aortic artery or the aortic valve into the aorta, the very first branch it comes off is to bring blood back to the heart to feed the heart itself. All right? Because as the blood passes through the heart, that blood does not go to the heart. It must be pumped out, and then we have the arteries, these coronary arteries that feed the front side and the back side of the heart. Before it even comes over here to go up the brachiocephalic, which would actually take it to the brain and in your upper torso. And then they have the veins that come back, and they'll come in at the, again, back over on the right atrium through where they'll connect back up with the superior and inferior vena cavas. All right. Cardiac myocytes, in other words, cardiac muscle cells, will contract all on their own, spontaneously. They beat roughly between 40 and 60 beats per minute all by themselves. I don't need any help to do it. Okay. That's why somebody can be brain dead and the heart can still be beating, because they are able to conduct all on their own. Now, what causes this is there's no innervation. This is not controlled by the brain. All right, so you've got the sinoatrial node, okay? Sinoatrial node, and is superior, right near the superior vena cava, and is next to the, discard this indication. It's in the right atrium, all right? This is known as the pacemaker, okay? So that's the one that sends the impulse out to tell the heart to contract. It starts in the right atrium. Then below it, inferior to it, I should say, we have the AV node, the atrioventricular node. Again, because right where that right AV valve is, it's kind of a booster and sends the impulse further down the line, down the ventricles to conduct things, to conduct the impulse. Through the middle of the heart, this part called the interventricular septum, is where you have this bundle of His. Somebody named it, not me. It's where these main conduction pathways are, and it'll pass down, and then we have Purkinje fibers that will go and loop back up around the ventricles for the contraction purpose. So it'll look better. You can see a little better with the picture here. Again, here's the SA node. It starts the contraction and it passes through, and it has the atrium contract. The atrium, little ones on top of the heart, squeeze and help push the blood down into the ventricles. Here's the bundle. There's the AV node. Here's the bundle of His. And then it comes down and we have Purkinje fibers. Now this meaty portion right through here between the two ventricles is the interventricular septum. So it's between the ventricles, interventricular septum, so it separates. But it'll pass down here, and this will conduct the rest of it, and that causes the rest of the heart to contract the ventricle, and that's how the heart contracts. All right, listening to it is called auscultation, if you remember way back in chapter 1. And EKGs are just common tools for them. So what are some of the sounds they make? Love dub, you've probably heard that. And that's from these valves right here. Should be the atrium should be it's the atrium and contracting, and then the ventricles contracting, and that's what you're hearing for the love dub. EKG, an electrocardiogram. Sometimes you'll see it as an I said EKG. ECG is an electrocardiogram. Sometimes you'll hear it as an EKG. It's just the German spelling of still an electrocardiogram. What it does is it measures the depolarization of those muscles. All right, so we can put this electrodes in there, and we can detect this. They depolarize very quickly, and they'll pause for a second before they relax. Because the atria are small, it's a small signal, not a lot of conduction going on. The ventricles are larger, so we get a much larger conduction, and we see this on the EKG itself. So we record these depolarizations and repolarization events, okay? And somebody named them PQRST, I have no idea who. And here's what's happening. In the P wave, the atria depolarize. In other words, they contract. Then the QRS is the depolarization of the ventricles. They're going to contract, and you're going to see a difference in the size of the spikes on them because the ventricle muscles are much larger than the atrial muscles. And the T wave is the repolarization of the ventricles. We can't see the repolarization of the atrium because when they're repolarizing, the QRS is depolarizing. We see it instead because it's so much larger. So we look at the picture right here. The P wave, little bump there, is the atrium contracting. They depolarize and they contract. Then we get right here is where they would also be repolarizing. But because we have this huge spike, this QRS spike, it masks it. It hides. It's hiding the repolarization. So this is the depolarization of the ventricles. And then we see the T, and that is the repolarization of the ventricles. And then we'll start all over again. It'll be another PQRST, PQRST as it goes along. All right, so if you're looking in here, there it is. This is a normal EKG. You see the, you see the PQRST, PQRST, PQR, normal rhythm. Over here on this particular one, well, I jumped, I should have gone here, but we're just gonna go right over to this one, and let us see. We're missing a P wave. This means that our SA node is not firing, but the AV node is firing. We're still getting the QRST and the QRS and a T. We skip a P, QRS, PQRS, or excuse me, QRST, QRST. So that again, that's where an SA. And I'm not nowhere near an expert on these things, and I don't claim it either. You'll learn more when you get into nursing school if that's where you're going. And then to the bottom one, no, let's start right here. So we have our P wave, Q, R, S, T, P, nothing. P, Q, R, S, T, P, blank again, P, Q, R, S, T. This one here, the AV node is not firing. This one's called, this is a secondary block. So the initial impulse is going, but it's not continuing the whole time. So this one's actually skipping a beat, which is never good. You don't want your heart to skip a beat. This, I can't tell you exactly what it does. Again, that's not my area. And then over here, there's no rhythm or pattern at all. That's because this is what we call fibrillation. And this just means everything's just contracting all randomly. It's very chaotic. To fix this, we usually put the electrodes on and we shock somebody to try to get them back into normal sinus rhythm, or to defibrillate them and to go hopefully back to this up here. But these are just some examples for you. I really want you to focus on the process of the contraction, what's happening in each one of these phases. And right here, this SA, AV, bundle of His, those structures. Circulation, we kind of drew that on that one. Major circulation through the heart. The major structures of the heart, the valve, different names of the valves, the major vessels of the heart, major chambers of the heart, the chambers of the heart. Know those for the quiz and test. All right, thank you very much.